The night air outside Tessa Thompson's apartment carried a soft Texas chill, the kind that usually cooled the mind. But nothing felt calm about the moment unfolding on her front steps. A single porch light glowed above them, casting enough brightness for John Koosman to see every tremble in her expression. He had come straight from a meeting, still wearing his crisp shirt, still breathing like a man running from a storm. He was ready to fight for her, ready to explain everything that had gone wrong. But Tessa stepped closer, her eyes filled with something he had never seen from her before. Hurt mixed with fear, a fear not of him, but of the world that followed him. "Tessa, talk to me," John pleaded, voice low, steady, but carrying the weight of someone used to fixing problems with solutions rather than emotions. "Whatever you're thinking right now, don't shut me out." She looked at him with trembling lashes, her heart racing so loudly she thought he might hear it. She leaned in, slowly, almost too slowly, and John leaned forward too, certain she was about to give him some kind of reassurance. But instead, she whispered something into his ear. Something small, something quiet, something that broke him completely. The whisper slipped into him with the force of a blade wrapped in softness. His expression shifted instantly, shoulders stiffening, the breath leaving his chest as though she had punched through the armor he'd built around his heart. For a man who held boardrooms in the palm of his hand, who negotiated contracts worth billions without blinking, this single whisper made him stumble backward on her porch step. "Tessa." His voice cracked, just once, but enough to reveal how deeply her words had cut. She stepped back, hands curling into her sleeves, unsure of whether she should reach for him or let him process what she'd said. Her throat tightened, and for a split second she regretted speaking at all. But she stood firm. It was the truth she had been carrying, and truth always demanded to be spoken. John blinked hard, trying to process what he had just heard. His chest rose and fell sharply, each breath sounding uneven. He dragged a hand over his jaw, confused, wounded, searching for something to hold on to as if the ground had shifted under him. He had known fear before, fear of failure, fear of betrayal, fear of losing the empire he'd built. But this fear was different. This was the fear of losing her. Tessa Thompson, the nurse who had cared for him when he was at his weakest, had just spoken words capable of crushing a man who thought he had already tasted every form of heartbreak. The porch light hummed quietly. A dog barked in the distance. But for John, everything stilled. Whatever she had whispered, whatever truth she had finally released, it had changed everything. For a moment, Tessa stood frozen on the porch, watching John struggle for steady breath. The quiet between them felt heavy, but it wasn't the kind of silence that came from anger. It came from truth, truth that demands to be acknowledged, even when it hurts. She wrapped her arms around herself, unsure of what happens next. And as John kept his eyes fixed on the ground, almost afraid to meet hers again, a quiet question settled over both of them, one that many people carry but rarely say aloud. Have you ever cared so deeply for someone, only to realize they're terrified of what being with you might cost them? The thought alone can shake anyone, even the strongest, even someone like John. He lifted his gaze slowly, and the pain behind his eyes wasn't the kind born from pride. It was the kind that blooms when love meets reality, when the simplicity of two hearts collides with the complicated world outside. Another question lingered in the air. Have you ever loved someone whose world looked nothing like yours, yet your heart insisted on choosing them anyway? That was their story. Two people from entirely different backgrounds, one shaped by early mornings in hospital wards, the other shaped by high-rise boardrooms and constant media attention. Normally, their lives would never cross. Yet here they were, held together by something neither fully understood but both felt deeply. John finally spoke, his voice softer than before. "Tessa, why would you think saying that to me would make me walk away?" She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "Because loving someone like you comes with a price I never asked for," she whispered. "People see you, and they don't see me anymore." And there it was, the heart of the fear so many people know too well. Would you stay with someone if the entire world suddenly judged you for loving them? John stepped forward, but he didn't touch her. He knew she needed space to breathe. Still, his voice carried a desperation he didn't try to hide. "Tessa, I never wanted your life to get harder because of me." Her lips trembled. "It already has." Behind her voice sat the quiet truth that often goes unspoken. Love isn't just romance. Sometimes it brings pressure, attention, expectations, and questions that no one prepares you for. What if caring for someone means losing the version of yourself you fought so hard to build? Tessa murmured. John lowered his head, absorbing the weight of her words. He had built a world so large that it cast shadows he never meant to create, and she was standing in one of them. The questions hung in the night air like quiet confessions, questions every heart has asked at least once in its lifetime. John stood there on the porch, shaken in a way he never expected. Not because of the whisper itself, though it had struck deep, but because of what it meant. Tessa hadn't pulled away because she stopped caring. She pulled away because her entire identity had been shaken the moment the world discovered their connection. The truth was simple and painful. The second their photo hit the Texas news, her life stopped belonging only to her. Her career, which she had fought for with late nights, textbooks, and calloused hands. Her peace, which she rebuilt through service and care for others. Her privacy, which she never imagined she would have to defend. All of it had been pushed into the spotlight because she cared for a man whose name carried more weight than she ever asked for. John swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a low, steady tone. Tessa. My world shouldn't hurt you. But it did, she whispered. And there, in the space between them, the central truth of their story surfaced. John's wealth wasn't protecting her. It was harming her. Not intentionally. But power doesn't have to be cruel to cause damage. Her hands shook slightly as she continued. People think I'm with you for reasons they made up. They don't know me. They don't know us. John pressed his palm against his forehead, fighting the ache growing behind his eyes. I never wanted you to pay for being close to me. I never imagined it would follow you like this. Both of them stood in the quiet Texas night, holding emotions too heavy to name. And that's when the story pulls the audience deeper, because the question becomes, can two people survive a love that demands more courage than either expected? The answer comes later in the story. But for now, the moment holds tension like a breath waiting to be released. Tessa, John whispered, tell me how to fix this. She stepped forward and gave him the truth he wasn't ready for. Fixing it isn't the problem, she murmured. The problem is what being with you costs me. Her words landed like a final blow, and John's chest tightened. He took a step back, not by choice, but because emotion forced it. His foot scraped the porch step. His shoulders sagged. His confidence cracked. John stumbled back, visibly shaken. A billionaire CEO, broken by a whisper from the one woman who never wanted anything from him except honesty. But while he was trying to recover from those words, the world delivered another hit. Tessa's phone buzzed on the porch rail. She turned it over. On the screen, a Texas news headline showing her and John laughing together at the county fair. Her heart dropped. Panic shot through her eyes, and all John could do was watch as the consequences of his world exploded into hers. Her voice trembled. This is what I was afraid of. John reached toward her, but she stepped back. That's where the hook ends. Because this story begins long before this porch and stretches far beyond it. Welcome to Mr. Brugman's Stories, where powerful stories don't just entertain, they teach life-changing lessons. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. Today we embark on a new journey to bring peace and love to the world. God bless you as you listen to this story. The automatic doors of Dallas General slid shut behind Tessa Thompson as she stepped into the quiet hallway, her shoulders sagging under the weight of another 12-hour shift. Her white scrubs clung to her back, marked by the kind of long-day sweat every nurse knew too well. The corridor lights hummed softly above her, offering a calmness she rarely felt after midnight. Her mind drifted to the lukewarm mug of tea waiting for her at home, and the stack of nursing textbooks she'd probably fall asleep on. She was tired down to the bone, but it was the kind of tired that came with purpose. She glanced at the time on her watch. A little past midnight. Her mother would be finishing her shift at the diner about now, wiping down tables and tucking tips into her apron. The thought made Tessa's heart warm. Years of watching her mother work extra hours had shaped her determination. Every late shift, every class, every exam. She carried the hope of becoming a doctor not just for herself, but for her family. She stepped into the elevator, rubbing her thumb across the edge of her badge. As the doors began to close, she took a sip from her half-finished hospital coffee. It was cold, but familiar, and that was enough. The quiet ride down felt like a moment stolen from time, until a distant sound shattered it. Sirens, not the kind that wailed in the streets, but the short, sharp alarms that echoed through hospital floors when trauma cases were rushed in. Before the elevator reached the lobby, The speaker crackled to life. Trauma bay incoming. Severe injuries. All available support towards 7 billions. Tessa's breath hitched. Her shift was officially over. She had every right to keep walking, to head home, to rest. But something inside her, something deeply woven into who she was, pushed her feet in the opposite direction the moment the elevator doors opened. She turned sharply toward the trauma wing. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the freshly mopped tiles as she jogged down the hall. Nurses huddled near the double doors, preparing supplies. A stretcher burst through, flanked by paramedics speaking in clipped, urgent tones. "Hit and run on I-30, one called out. Male, early 30s, multiple fractures, decreased consciousness on arrival." Tessa didn't think twice. She hung her ID and gloves back on the hook near the nurse's station, something she'd only do when she intended to stay, and stepped into the chaos with steady hands. The patient lay strapped to the stretcher, blood staining the edges of his shirt, breathing shallowly. His face was bruised, jaw cut, hair matted with dust from the road. But Tessa didn't look away. She never did. She stepped into position beside the physicians, grabbing supplies without being asked. "Vitals?" she called out. Dropping, a nurse replied. "Prep for sedation," the surgeon ordered. The room moved in practiced rhythm, each person knowing their role. Tessa monitored his breathing, adjusting the foreline, steadying his shoulder when he tensed under the initial rounds of sedation. Hours passed in a blur of stitching, stabilizing, and finely measured decisions. Sweat rolled down Tessa's temple, ignored the moment it touched her cheek. By the time the surgery team stepped back and the tension eased, the bruised man lay still but alive. Stable. Saved. When they brought him to Ward 7B, Tessa followed. She wasn't supposed to stay. She had done enough. But something made her pause at the foot of the bed, watching him with a strange pull in her chest. Then, as the minutes ticked by, his eyelids fluttered. She leaned forward. "Hey," she whispered gently. His eyes opened, slowly at first, then fully, landing on her with confusion and pain. Where am I?" he asked, voice coarse as gravel. "You're at Dallas General," she said, her tone soft but steady. "You were in an accident. But you're safe now." He tried to shift, wincing when the movement sent pain rippling through his chest. "Easy," she murmured, guiding him back against the pillow. Her fingers touched his shoulder lightly, and he looked at her with an expression somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. "Who are you?" he asked. She smiled. "I'm Nurse Tessa Thompson." He let out a small, breathy laugh, the kind that hurt him to make but came naturally anyway. "Tessa," he repeated, as though tasting the name. "Feels like I've been hit by a freight train." "You kind of were," she replied softly. He watched her carefully, taking in her calm posture, her steady hands, the warmth in her eyes despite her exhaustion. "What time is it?" he asked. "Past 3, Tessa answered. "Shouldn't you be home?" He whispered. She hesitated. "Probably," she admitted, "but I wanted to make sure you woke up okay." The corner of his mouth lifted faintly. "Thank you, Tessa." They spent the early dawn hours in a quiet exchange, nothing dramatic, nothing forced. He told her he grew up outside Austin, something about cattle and long Texas evenings, though his voice weakened halfway through and she urged him to rest. She told him she was studying to be a doctor, that her mother worked hard, that she wanted to help people who had no one else. They didn't know each other, but somehow, in that dim, peaceful hour before sunrise, a quiet understanding formed. He wasn't John Cusimán to her yet. He was just John, and she was simply Tessa, someone who had stayed because she cared. Sunlight crept through the blinds of Ward 7B, softening the sterile glow inside the room. Tessa stood by the counter reviewing a chart, the soft rhythm of morning footsteps filling the hall behind her. She glanced at the patient in the bed, John, as he had introduced himself, still resting, his breathing steadier than the night before. His bruises looked harsh in daylight, yet his expression carried a kind of calm she hadn't seen when he first opened his eyes. Tessa tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and reviewed his chart again. She didn't know why she felt nervous. Maybe it was because she'd stayed far past her shift. Maybe it was because she felt more connected to this patient than she ever intended. Or maybe it was because something about him felt familiar, though she couldn't quite place it. The door opened, and Dr. Kendall stepped in. "Good morning," she greeted, flipping through her clipboard. She approached John's bed and spoke gently. "You're lucky. Surgery went well. We'll move you to ICU once a room is ready." John nodded. weakness still visible in the way he shifted slightly on the bed. "Thank you," he whispered. Dr. Kendall gave a small smile. "Rest. You'll need it." When she left, Tessa followed her toward the hallway. She had a question forming on her lips, something about updating John's medication schedule. But before she could ask, she heard two nurses talking quietly at the desk. "Did you see the name on the VIP chart?" One whispered. "Crazy, right? I had no idea he was coming in last night. Imagine being the one to treat him." Tessa slowed her steps. The tone in their voices felt strange, oddly excited. As she reached the counter, one of the nurses handed her a chart. "This is his official file," she said. "Since you were here during intake, you may want to look over it." Tessa nodded, flipping the cover open. Her eyes froze. Her breath caught. There it was, written plainly, unmistakably, John Koosman. Her stomach tightened. Her fingers trembled against the paper. She knew the name. Everyone in Texas knew the name. He wasn't just a successful businessman. He was the founder of Koosman Logistics, one of the biggest companies in the region. His face had appeared on billboards, conference posters, charity events. She remembered seeing an article once about him donating supplies after a hurricane. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just John, the injured man who smiled at her in the dawn hours. This was John Koosman, a billionaire, a public figure, someone whose presence usually came with quiet security guards and closed doors. She felt the blood drain from her face as her mind pieced together the truth. "Tessa," a soft voice called. She turned. John was awake, watching her with concern. The way his eyebrows drew together told her he sensed something was wrong before she even spoke. "Are you okay?" he asked. She swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. She stepped toward him, still clutching the chart. "John." Her voice came out smaller than she expected. I didn't know. I mean, I knew your name was John, but I didn't know you were him." He held her gaze, the tension around his shoulders tightening. "So, you found out?" Tessa nodded. "I heard the nurses talking, and I checked your chart. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to react like this. She exhaled shakily. "You're John Koosman." He didn't flinch. "I was going to tell you," he said quietly. "I just didn't want you to look at me differently before we had a real conversation." The honesty in his voice surprised her, but the confusion swirling in her chest didn't settle. "You talked to me like I was just a person who happened to be here," she said softly. "You are a person," he replied. "A real one. And last night, you didn't treat me like anything but a man who needed help." He shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. "Do you know how rare that is for me?" She blinked, unsure how to process the warmth behind his words. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't arrogant. He wasn't acting like someone expecting special treatment. Instead, he looked almost vulnerable. "But why not say something?" She whispered. "Because the second I say my last name," he answered, "everything changes. The way people talk to me, the way they look at me, the things they want. I didn't want that with you." Her heart tightened. The sincerity in his voice pulled something in her chest, something she had tried hard to keep guarded. "I didn't treat you differently," she said quietly. "I know," he murmured. "That's why I didn't want it to end." Tessa's breath caught. She felt both hurt and unexpectedly drawn in at the same time. Something inside her whispered that this was the kind of honesty she'd never gotten from anyone else. Raw, unfiltered, direct. He looked at her, eyes softening. "Tessa, did I scare you?" She hesitated. "A little," she admitted. "Not because of who you are, but because I thought maybe I'd said the wrong thing last night, or stayed too long, or—" "You didn't," he interrupted gently. "You stayed because you cared, and I'm grateful for that." Her heart fluttered. This wasn't flirtation. This wasn't a billionaire being charming. This was a man who seemed relieved to be seen without the layers of expectation attached to his name. He took a slow breath. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "When I'm discharged," he said, "would you join me for coffee? Nothing fancy, just you, me, and 2 cups of caffeine that taste better than hospital blends." Her lips curved into a shy smile. "Are you asking me out, John?" His smile mirrored hers, warm and genuine. "I think I am." Tessa felt her pulse quicken. The moment was simple, but something inside her shifted, quietly, unexpectedly. Maybe it was the honesty in his tone. Maybe it was the way he looked at her like she was more than a passing face in a busy shift. Maybe it was because, for the first time in a long time, someone wanted her company without expecting anything else. "I'll think about it," she whispered. He chuckled softly. "Fair enough. I'll wait." And for the first time since she read his name on the chart, her heart steadied. The tension between them didn't disappear, but it softened into something warm, something new, something neither could explain yet. 2 days after the accident, John was discharged with strict instructions to rest. He didn't argue. Instead, he used his energy on something he felt mattered far more, keeping the promise he made to Tessa. When he stepped into the hospital lobby with a slight limp and a sling supporting his injured arm, he noticed her at once. Tessa stood by the front desk, flipping through a chart, unaware he had been watching her for several seconds. She looked tired, yet somehow her presence still softened the busy hall around her. He approached slowly. "You look focused," he said, his voice carrying a gentle humor. She looked up, startled. "John, you're leaving already?" "Only because they told me I couldn't stay forever," he replied. Her smile warmed, though she tried to hide it by adjusting her badge. "You need rest." "I know," he said, "but I need that coffee too." Tessa hesitated. She had promised herself she wouldn't mix her private feelings with her job, and yet the man standing in front of her, with bruises fading but sincerity shining even brighter, made it impossible not to soften. "Okay," she finally said, "1 coffee. But nothing fancy." He lifted his good hand in surrender. "No fancy. I promise." They walked out of the hospital, stepping into the warm Dallas afternoon. John didn't bring a driver. He didn't bring security. He didn't bring anything that hinted at his public life. Instead, he waved toward an old Ford parked by the curb. "You drive that?" she asked, surprised. "Borrowed it from one of my managers." He laughed. "I thought showing up in anything sleek might scare you off." "Well, you're not wrong," she teased. They drove to a small diner on the outskirts of town, the kind with red vinyl booths and a bell above the door. The place smelled of fresh biscuits and strong coffee. Locals chatted quietly at tables. It reminded Tessa of her childhood: warm spaces, simple food, the comfort of familiarity. A waitress greeted them. "Morning, sweetheart. Sit wherever you like." They chose a booth by the window. Tessa slipped into her seat, smoothing her scrubs, while John lowered himself carefully, mindful of his healing ribs. "So," John began, wrapping his hands around a steaming mug once the waitress. "Set it down. Tell me something you didn't mention that night." "That night?" she echoed. "When you stayed with me." "When we talked," he clarified. "There's more to you than dreams and early morning study sessions." She hesitated. Opening up wasn't something she did easily, but the way he looked at her made her feel like she wasn't wasting words. "My mom always says I was born with a stubborn heart," she said softly. "I don't give up. Even when things get rough." He leaned forward slightly. "I noticed." "What about you?" she asked. "You mentioned ranch life, but that's a big leap from running a company." John paused, taking in her question. "I didn't grow up with the life people think I have now," he said. "It came with sacrifice, long nights, more mistakes than people realize." "You make it sound lonely," she murmured. "It can be," he admitted. "Which is why talking to you felt different." Her cheeks warmed. She wasn't used to hearing such honesty, especially from someone whose world was usually protected by layers of distance and formality. The waitress brought plates of breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and crispy bacon. They talked between bites, sharing small stories, laughing softly at things that didn't need explanation. After they finished eating, John cleared his throat. "There's something else I wanted to ask you," he said. "Oh no," she teased. "Should I be nervous?" "Only if you hate fun." "What does that mean?" "I want to take you somewhere," he replied. "If you have a couple hours." Her eyebrows raised. "Somewhere like..." "Where?" He pointed out the window. "County fair's open today." She blinked. "You want to go to the fair?" "I do," he said. "I figured a slow ride on a Ferris wheel might be safer for my ribs than anything else." She laughed, an easy melodic laugh that made his smile deepen. She didn't admit it aloud, but the idea tugged at her heart. Fairs reminded her of childhood weekends, cotton candy, and loud games. It felt innocent, easy, safe. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." They drove a few miles out of town until lights began peeking over the horizon. The fairground buzzed with families, kids running in circles, music floating through the warm air. John walked beside her, close but not overstepping, his injured arm resting in the sling. "You sure you're good to walk this much?" she asked. "I'll survive," he said. "Just don't make me race you." They wandered past booths filled with games and snacks. Tessa pointed out a stand selling lemonade. John ordered 2 cups, insisting he pay even when she tried to protest. When they reached the Ferris wheel, John paused. "Ready?" he asked. "I haven't been on one of these in years," she admitted. "Then it's overdue." They climbed into the small seat together, the operator securing the bar in front of them. As the wheel began to turn, Tessa inhaled deeply. The higher they rose, the more the fare shrunk beneath them, lights turning into tiny sparks against the late afternoon sky. John watched her profile as she leaned slightly toward the window. Her eyes softened as the sun dipped, creating a quiet glow across her cheeks. "It's beautiful from up here," she whispered. "Yeah," he said, but he wasn't looking at the view. She felt the warmth of his gaze and turned slightly, meeting his eyes. Something, soft, cautious, but real, passed between them. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm better than I've been in a long time," he replied. The Ferris wheel paused at the top. The world stilled around them. The breeze lifted her hair, brushing it across her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear, suddenly aware of how close they were. "This feels nice," she said. "It does," he whispered. Their hands touched, accidental at first. Then neither of them pulled away. In that suspended moment, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but gently and undeniably. A seed of affection, fragile yet bright, took root between them. The Ferris wheel eased them back down toward the fairground, but neither John nor Tessa moved from where they sat. Their hands rested close enough for warmth to pass between their skin without a deliberate touch. When the wheel rotated again and lifted them a second time, John let out a soft breath that carried a mix of relief and anticipation. Relief because being beside her felt natural, and anticipation because he didn't want the moment to end too quickly. As they rose again, Tessa watched the fair shrink beneath them. The small clusters of families, the bright lights from the nearby game booths, and the soft music from the speakers blended together like distant comfort. Up here, the world felt slowed, quiet in a way that allowed her thoughts to settle. John glanced at her. "Round 2, he said softly. She smiled, leaning her head slightly toward the open air. "I don't mind." "Good," he replied, "because I didn't get enough time up here the first round." She laughed lightly, the sound brushing against him like a warm breeze. "Is that so?" "Yes," he said, turning more fully toward her. "The view got better the longer I looked." Tessa felt her heart flutter, but not from surprise. John didn't toss compliments carelessly. He offered them with sincerity, as though he measured each word before releasing it. The wheel paused midway, giving them a moment suspended halfway between earth and sky. This new height wasn't as breathtaking as the top, but the gentle sway of the cart created a soft intimacy neither of them tried to break. "Tessa," John said quietly, his voice threading through the hum of the machinery. "Can I ask you something?" She turned slightly to face him. "Sure." "Why did you stay with me that night in the hospital? Past your shift, I mean." Her eyes softened. "Because you needed someone to talk to, and because you looked like you didn't want to wake up alone." He studied her expression with something close to gratitude. "I didn't." She shifted her weight, resting her elbows on the metal bar. The wind lifted a strand of hair, brushing it across her cheek. Without thinking, John reached out and gently moved it back behind her ear. His touch was light, almost uncertain, but the gesture warmed her more than the sun dipping across the horizon. "You're thoughtful," she whispered. "Not always," he admitted. "But with you, it's easy." Tessa's cheeks warmed, but not with nervousness. It was something gentler, like an acknowledgement she hadn't expected to feel this early. The wheel began to rise again, pulling them higher. At the peak, as the cart swayed slightly, Tessa leaned closer, her voice dropping into a private tone meant only for him. "John, I'm really glad you're okay." The simplicity of her words struck deeper than anything poetic could have. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed. It was pure. "Thank you," he replied, his throat tightening slightly. "I'm glad I woke up and saw you there." Her eyes flickered with something tender, and before he could say more, she leaned a little closer and whispered, "Soft, sweet, honest. You make me feel seen." John's breath caught. Of all the things she could have said, that was the one he never expected. He'd spent years surrounded by people who saw him as a title, a bank account, a headline. But this woman, a nurse who barely knew him, had looked past all of it. Her whisper didn't break him. It warmed him from the inside out. He swallowed hard, fighting the unexpected emotion rising in his chest. Tessa, that means more than you know. The Ferris wheel began its descent, but neither of them felt rushed. When the cart returned to the bottom and the operator lifted the safety bar, John stepped out carefully and extended a hand to help her down. She took it without hesitation, her fingers fitting into his palm with surprising ease. As they walked back into the flow of the fare, Tessa nudged him gently. "So what now?" "Well," he said, glancing around at the booths, "I saw a sign for line dancing earlier." She raised a brow. "With your ribs?" "I'll be careful," he promised, "but I can't miss an opportunity to embarrass myself in front of you." She laughed, full and bright. "You're impossible." Only sometimes they followed the sound of a country tune drifting from a small open area where couples were dancing under string lights. Some moved gracefully, others shuffled awkwardly, but everyone wore expressions of simple joy. John held out his hand. "May I?" She hesitated for one heartbeat, then placed her hand in his. "Just don't drop me. With one arm in a sling? I wouldn't dare." He guided her slowly, mindful of his healing body. They didn't attempt any complicated steps. Instead, they swayed gently in time with the music. Tessa rested her hand lightly on his shoulder. John's other hand rested at her waist, steady, respectful, warm. "You're not bad at this," she teased. "I'm learning," he replied. "You make it easy." As they moved beneath the soft glow of the lights, their laughter mingled with the song. The world around them blurred into a gentle backdrop, children running past with cotton candy, teenagers winning stuffed toys, parents sharing quiet moments. But Tessa and John remained in their own small circle of warmth. At one point she looked up at him, and their eyes met. No rush, no hesitation, just a quiet recognition of something real forming between them. "John," she whispered, "this feels nice." "It does," he answered. "Better than I expected." "Better than coffee?" she teased. He chuckled softly. "Much better." The song ended, but neither stepped away immediately. They held on to the last notes, enjoying the closeness that grew from something simple and genuine. When they finally pulled back, John exhaled slowly. "This day, I'll remember it for a long time." Tessa smiled, brushing her thumb along her palm. "So will I." They walked side by side through the fair, their shoulders occasionally brushing, their hands swinging close enough to touch. Whatever this was, whatever it was becoming, it felt real. It felt gentle. It felt safe. Something neither of them had expected to find. The drive back from the fair was quiet in the way two hearts settle after something unexpectedly beautiful. Tessa rested her hand near the truck's window, feeling the warmth of the evening fade against her skin. John glanced at her occasionally, short, careful glances, taking in the softness on her face, the way she seemed lost in the moment rather than in worry. When he pulled up outside her apartment building, she unbuckled her seatbelt slowly. "Thank you," she said. "For today." "Thank you," he echoed, "for sharing it with me." She lingered for a breath, then stepped out of the truck with a final wave. John watched until she disappeared behind the stairwell, then drove away with a quiet smile. The next morning, Tessa woke to the sharp chirp of her phone vibrating non-stop on the nightstand. Her eyes were still heavy from sleep as she reached for it, pushing stray curls from her forehead. She froze the moment the screen lit up. 16 missed calls, dozens of messages from unknown numbers, 3 notifications from local news pages. Confusion gripped her. She clicked the first link before she could think twice. There it was, her own face, John's face, both of them captured beside the Ferris wheel, laughing, close, unaware of the camera pointed at them. The headline read, "Koosman seen at T County Fair with mystery woman." Her breath left her in a single sharp exhale. She clicked another article, another photo, another angle, another headline, "Eyes, this the nurse who captured Texas's most eligible CEO?" Tessa's fingers trembled as she scrolled. Her coffee machine hissed in the background. Forgotten. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. "This can't be happening," she whispered. But it was. Screenshot after screenshot, her smiling at John, her leaning slightly toward him on the Ferris wheel, her dancing with him under the string lights. None of it looked scandalous, but the fact that it existed at all, publicly, made her stomach twist. A knock at her door snapped her awake. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Not like this. Instead, she forced herself to get dressed for work. Scrubs, simple earrings, clean sneakers, the armor she wore every day. But today, sliding into that uniform didn't feel comforting. It felt like stepping into a spotlight she never asked for. At the hospital, everything felt different the moment she walked through the doors. A pair of nurses at the front desk stopped whispering the second she approached. Someone she didn't recognize glanced at her badge longer than necessary. A patient's son stared at her, then at his phone as if trying to confirm something. Tessa kept walking. Her steps were steady, but inside the floor felt unstable. She reached the nurse's station and grabbed a stack of charts, determined to stay focused. She wasn't going to let a few photos control her day. "Morning, Tessa," Nurse Carla said, her smile thin. "Busy one today." "Morning," Tessa replied, pretending not to notice the glance Carla exchanged with another nurse. She checked her first patient, but even in the quiet of the room, she felt watched, like someone was waiting for her to slip up or say something revealing. The pressure tightened her breath. By noon, the whispers grew louder. "Is that her? I heard she was at the fair. He's a billionaire." She must have known. No wonder she stayed in his room. Her fingers clenched around her pen. She wanted to shout, "I didn't do anything wrong," but that would only feed the fire. She kept her head down, moving from room to room, but the stories kept multiplying around her. She saw her reflection in the stainless steel equipment tray, eyes tired, shoulders tense, lips pressed tight. This wasn't who she was. She wasn't supposed to be a headline. She wasn't supposed to be the subject of gossip. She wasn't supposed to feel like her identity was slipping away. During a brief moment alone in the staff lounge, she pressed her palms against the cool counter and closed her eyes. "I'm just Tessa," she whispered. Just Tessa, but it didn't feel true anymore. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another message request. Another notification from an article. She silenced the phone and shoved it into her pocket, willing herself not to cry. Nurses walked in and out, pretending not to stare, pretending not to whisper behind their hands. By the end of her shift, the tension in her chest felt like a weight she couldn't lift. When she reached her locker, her hands were shaking. She sat on the bench and exhaled shakily. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly. "I didn't ask for any of it." Her sense of self, carefully shaped through years of hard work, quiet nights with textbooks, and long conversations with her mother, felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She wasn't in control anymore, and nothing terrified her more than that. As she stepped outside into the warm Texas evening, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was John. Her heart squeezed. She answered hesitantly. "John." "Tessa," he said softly, his tone calm but concerned. "I saw the articles. I'm coming to you." She closed her eyes, relief and fear colliding inside her. "John, I don't know if I can handle this," she whispered. "I won't let you face it alone." His promise was steady, but steadiness didn't erase the truth. Her world had already changed, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for the next step. Tessa stood outside the hospital entrance, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag as the late afternoon heat settled around her. Cars rolled through the parking lot, families shuffled toward their appointments, but everything felt distant, as though she were watching life move without her. When John's dark-colored pickup pulled into the drop-off zone, she felt her chest tighten. He stepped out carefully, still nursing his healing ribs, but the urgency in his steps cut through his discomfort. His eyes went straight to her, worry etched into every line of his face. "Tessa," he called softly. The sound of her name carried the comfort she'd been craving since morning. Still, her body tensed as he approached, not because she didn't want him there, but because everything inside her felt too fragile to touch. He reached her and paused, giving her the space to decide how close he could stand. "I came as soon as I saw the new articles," he said, his voice low and steady. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer right away. Her throat tightened, and for a moment she feared her voice wouldn't hold. She looked at him, this man she'd shared a day of laughter and warmth with, and tried to find the version of herself that felt grounded just yesterday. "I don't know," she whispered. "I really don't." John took a slow breath. "Let's walk," he suggested gently. "Somewhere quiet." She nodded, and they moved toward the sidewalk that wrapped around the side of the hospital. The small courtyard behind the building was usually empty at this hour. They stopped near a metal bench beneath a young oak tree. "Tessa," he began carefully, "I never wanted you to wake up to headlines. If I could have shielded you from that, I would have—" She hugged her arms around herself. You couldn't have stopped it, John. Maybe not, he admitted. But I hate that you're hurting because of me. She looked away. That's the problem, she said quietly. Everything is suddenly about you, about us, about what people think they saw. And now I don't even feel like myself anymore. John stepped closer. You're still you. She shook her head. Am I? Because today at work, I wasn't Tessa Thompson, the nurse who's been here for years. I was the woman with the billionaire. That's all anyone saw. Tessa. They were whispering about me while I was holding patient charts, she continued, her voice cracking. I couldn't even walk down the hallway without feeling like I didn't belong. John's heart clenched. Seeing her like this, shaken, unsure, overwhelmed, struck him deeper than he expected. He reached out gently, cupping her elbows, giving her a sense of steadiness without pulling her in. I know this is unfair, he said. I know the spotlight is harsh, but I promise we can handle this together. She looked at him, tears beginning to form. That's just it, she whispered. I don't know if I can handle being in your world. I don't know if I'm strong enough for what comes with you. He softened his voice. You don't have to be strong every moment. Let me be part of that weight. But what if your world breaks me? She asked, her voice trembling. What if it takes everything I'm trying so hard to build? A long silence followed. Tessa's breaths came unevenly as she tried to steady herself. John's gaze stayed locked on hers, gentle yet full of conflict. I care about you, he murmured, more than I expected to, more than I've allowed myself to care in a long time. Her lips pressed together as she fought the storm inside her. He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek with the back of his fingers. Tessa, please don't walk away because of fear. We can figure this out. Her next words were barely audible. I don't want to be swallowed whole. You won't be, he promised. How can you know that? She asked, voice trembling with the raw edge of truth. Because I already feel myself slipping. Today I wasn't a nurse. I wasn't a student. I wasn't anything I've worked so hard to become. I was just a headline attached to your name. John's breath caught. He stepped closer, his chest tightening with helplessness. Tell me what you need. Tell me what I can do to make this easier. She looked at him, tears shining under the soft, lowering light. I don't know what I need, John. I don't even know who I am when I'm standing next to you. That sentence hit him hard. But the next one, and the whisper that followed, hit harder. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his with painful honesty. John, I'm scared of losing myself, she whispered. He shook his head. You won't. Then she leaned in, slowly, almost reluctantly, and whispered the words that cut straight into him, quiet enough that only he could hear. What if loving you means I stop being me? John froze. The breath left him. The ground felt unsteady. His heart cracked open in a way he didn't expect. Her whisper wasn't an accusation. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was fear, pure, unfiltered, devastating fear. He took a step back instinctively, as if absorbing the blow. Tessa, his voice wavered. You think being with me could erase you? She didn't answer. Her silence spoke louder than any word could. John dragged a hand across his face, fighting the ache in his chest. He wasn't used to this, being the source of someone's fear, being the reason someone questioned their identity. I never wanted to be the thing that made you doubt yourself, he whispered. I know, she said softly, but that's what's happening. The space between them grew still, heavy with truth neither could ignore. He wanted to pull her close. She wanted to step away before she drowned in something she couldn't control. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment. Your support helps our community grow and allows these stories to reach more people. Don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Brugman's stories for more life-changing narratives. Tessa wiped her cheeks gently. I'm sorry, John, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't, he lied softly, but he had never been more shaken. The whisper hung between them, quiet, soft, and strong enough to pull their world apart. The following morning, Tessa stood in front of her bathroom mirror, brushing her hair with slow, careful strokes. Her eyes looked different, tired in a way makeup wouldn't fix, distant in a way she couldn't hide. The whisper she had given John last evening still hovered at the edge of her mind, not because she regretted it, but because of what it revealed about how fragile she felt. She slipped into her scrubs, tying the drawstring with a stiffness she didn't recognize. When she stepped outside, The cool morning air brushed her cheeks, grounding her for a moment. But the peace didn't last long. As she walked toward the hospital, her chest tightened the closer she got. She wasn't afraid of the work. She wasn't afraid of her patients. She was afraid of the way the world suddenly saw her. Inside the lobby, the day shift buzzed with activity. Nurses checked schedules, families waited with tired expressions, and doctors moved briskly between rooms. It was the same environment she'd walked into hundreds of times, yet today it felt different, like she was stepping back into a space where her name carried an entirely new meaning. A group of nurses near the break room paused mid-conversation when she walked by. Their voices dipped, their glances flickered toward her badge. She kept walking, pretending she didn't notice even though the flush creeping into her cheeks betrayed her. In the supply room, she grabbed gloves with trembling fingers. A new volunteer peeked in, scanned her face, and offered a hesitant smile before disappearing as quickly as she appeared. Tessa closed her eyes for a second and exhaled sharply. "Just breathe," she told herself. "You're here to work." She entered her first patient's room, offering a soft greeting. The elderly woman smiled warmly, unaware of headlines or rumors, and Tessa felt a small wave of comfort wash through her. Here, inside these four walls, she was still the nurse who cared, listened, and helped. But outside, the judgment followed her like a shadow. Between rounds, she walked through the hallway toward the nurse's station. A few people stepped aside to let her pass. She knew this wasn't unusual, yet today it felt intentional. Someone whispered her name, not loudly, but enough for her to hear. "She's the one from—" Tessa didn't wait to hear the rest. She returned to her workstation, forcing herself to focus on chart updates and medication counts. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind remained tangled. She felt like she was shrinking into herself, becoming smaller and quieter with each passing hour. During lunch, she sat alone in a corner of the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich she didn't actually want. Her phone remained face down on the table, vibrating occasionally from calls she no longer had the energy to check. The small television mounted on the wall played a morning news segment, and even though no one said anything, she sensed the awareness in the room the moment her face flashed briefly on the screen as part of a recap. She looked away immediately, her appetite gone. When her break ended, she went back upstairs, weaving through patients and staff with the practiced grace of someone trying not to be seen. A doctor waved her over with a question about a medication dosage, and she responded calmly, though her voice felt thinner. As the day continued, Tessa found herself avoiding eye contact, stepping out of group conversations, and keeping her responses short. The more people looked at her, the quieter she became. Even her steps grew smaller, as though she didn't want to take up space. Her interactions with her patients were still gentle and warm. Those moments were the only pieces of herself she recognized. But the second she walked into the hallway, everything tightened again. At the end of her shift, she returned to the staff locker room. She sank onto the bench, staring at the floor. Her bag hung from her shoulder, but she didn't reach for it. She sat still, letting the silence wrap around her like a thin, fragile shield. Someone else entered the room, paused when they noticed her, then left without saying a word. She didn't blame them. She wasn't sure she had any words left inside her. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to hold back the pressure building in her chest. She didn't want to cry, not here, not now, but the strain of the day wasn't easy to push down. She had always been proud of who she was, a young woman working toward her dream, someone who loved helping people, someone who didn't need a spotlight or praise. She used to walk through these halls with confidence, knowing she was earning her future step by step. Now she felt like she was losing her grip on the version of herself she'd worked so hard to build. By the time she stepped outside into the evening air, she felt drained, emptier than she had been that morning. She walked home without music, without checking her phone, without glancing up at the sky the way she usually did to unwind. When she reached her apartment, she locked the door behind her and leaned against it, letting out a breath she'd been holding all day. The walls around her were quiet, but the quiet didn't comfort her. It reminded her of how alone she felt. Not because she had no one, but because she didn't know how to let anyone in right now. Not even John. Especially not John. She set her bag down, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at her hands. They shook faintly, a sign of how deeply the day had affected her. She curled them into her lap to steady them. She knew John would call again. She knew he cared. She knew none of this was his fault. But she also knew she couldn't talk to him. Not yet. Not while she felt like she was losing the parts of herself she valued most. She lay down slowly, curling on her side. It wasn't sleep she wanted. It was silence, stillness, a moment where she didn't have to pretend to be okay. As the room darkened around her, she whispered to herself, "I just need space, not from love, not from him, but from the noise swallowing her identity." And so, without telling John or anyone else, Tessa slipped deeper into her shell. Quiet, invisible, unreachable. For now. John stared at his phone long after the call ended, the last echo of Tessa's voice still hanging in the quiet of his home office. The whisper she'd given him outside the hospital, "What if loving you means I stop being me?" struck him again, sharp and deep. It kept replaying in his mind, not because he wanted to hear it, but because he couldn't escape the truth inside it. He placed the phone on his desk and leaned back in his chair, pressing his palm against his forehead. For years he had carried the weight of expectations, responsibilities, and scrutiny like armor. It never broke him. It rarely even cracked him. But Tessa's fear, her fear of losing herself because of his presence, was a kind of wound he didn't know how to treat. A soft knock broke the silence. His senior communications manager, the only member of his team he allowed into his house during off hours, stepped inside with a tablet in hand. "John," he said carefully, "the articles are spreading quickly. Do you want us to put out a statement?" John sat up straighter. "What kind of statement?" "A basic one, something that downplays the photo or frames it as a casual outing. We can push attention toward your latest business initiative instead." John shook his head. "No, I don't want anything that turns this into a circus. I don't want her dragged into more attention." The manager nodded, but hesitated. "The problem is, the speculation is getting louder. If we don't say anything, the vacuum fills itself." John exhaled slowly. "Then control the part we can. Talk to our usual press partners. Tell them to hold back on personal angles, no features, no clickbait headlines, and absolutely no interviews that mention her." The manager typed quickly. "Understood. I'll handle it." But John wasn't done. "And pull anyone on the team who tries to leak information," he added, the steel in his voice sharper than usual. "I don't care who they are. Remove them immediately." "Yes, sir." When the manager left, John turned toward the large window overlooking his yard. The Texas sky stretched wide, but today that openness felt heavy, pressing his thoughts inward. He picked up his phone again, scrolling through the missed calls he'd made to Tessa last night and this morning. She hadn't responded since the moment she whispered her fear to him. She wasn't angry, he could tell that much, but she was slipping into herself, retreating in a way that felt more alarming than any public scandal. John rose from his chair and walked into his living room. The house was clean, quiet, orderly, just like always, but today it felt too big, too empty. For someone who had built a fortune and a name known across the state, he had never felt more powerless. He sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the floor. "Tessa's afraid of disappearing because of me," he thought. "Because of my world. Because of the noise that follows me everywhere." He rubbed his thumb across his palm, a habit he'd formed whenever he needed to think deeply. He tried to replay the fair, the laughter, the dancing, the way her eyes lit when she talked about her dreams. None of it felt complicated then. None of it carried the weight of headlines or rumors. But now, he picked up one of the printed articles from his coffee table, something his PR team had left during briefing. Her face stared back at him next to his own. The image wasn't invasive, but it wasn't fair either. Someone had watched them privately and turned it into a spectacle. He clenched the paper in his hand. He wasn't angry at her. He wasn't disappointed. He wasn't even upset that she had pulled away. What ate at him was the realization that she felt her identity slipping simply because she cared about him, that she thought loving him meant sacrificing the person she'd worked so hard to become. His phone buzzed again. The manager texted, handled initial press control. "But you'll need to decide on a narrative soon." John replied immediately. "The narrative is that she's off limits, no more stories." Another message came seconds later. "Understood." He placed the phone down again, but the knot in his stomach didn't ease. He pressed both hands to his knees and leaned forward. He had spent years building walls, emotional ones, designed to keep people at arm's length. His world was too loud, too demanding, too exposed. The walls worked. They kept him safe. Until Tessa. She didn't push through them. She didn't force her way in. She didn't even know the walls existed. She simply spoke to him like a person when everyone else saw him as a headline or a paycheck. She stayed at his bedside when she didn't owe him anything. She listened instead of performing. And somewhere between the quiet dawn and the county fair, she slipped into the one part of him he never protected well enough. And now, Now she was hurting because of him. He closed his eyes. Tessa is afraid she'll disappear if she stays with me. But what if losing her is the thing that shatters me? This thought unsettled him more than anything he'd ever faced in business, injury, or public scrutiny. He stood up and paced the room, each step echoing lightly across the hardwood floor. His chest felt compressed, as if carrying a weight he couldn't set down. He replayed her whisper once more, not to torture himself, but because understanding it fully was the only way to fix this without breaking her further. What if loving you means I stop being me? It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't rejection. It was fear, honest, raw fear that came from someone who valued her own identity deeply. He knew then what he had to do. He had to protect her, not as a CEO covering a scandal, not as a public figure shaping a narrative, but as a man who cared more for her well-being than his reputation. But before he could fix anything, he needed to understand something first. Why did she feel unworthy of standing next to him? What part of his world made her feel small? What had he missed in her voice last night that hinted at something deeper? He needed answers. He needed clarity. He needed to see her face to face, not just as the woman he cared for, but as the woman fighting to hold on to herself. Because he realized she wasn't running from him, she was running from disappearing. And he couldn't let that happen, not to her. 2 days passed without a word from Tessa. John had tried calling, twice on the first morning, once the next evening, but every attempt rolled straight into voicemail. He didn't leave messages. Not because he lacked the words, but because he feared saying the wrong thing, pushing her further into a space where he couldn't reach her. Instead, he gave her room, but giving space didn't quiet the worry knotting his chest. On the third morning, he headed to a community children's clinic his company had sponsored for years. He wasn't scheduled to speak, nor did he intend to make a public appearance. He just needed to spend the morning doing something that reminded him of the reasons he started his work in the first place, values that had nothing to do with headlines or status. He arrived early, wearing a simple button-down and jeans. The clinic buzzed softly with activity, children coloring on waiting room benches, parents filling out forms, volunteers restocking shelves of donated toys. John greeted the program director with a quiet handshake and walked toward the back hall, where a reading event was taking place. He stepped into the doorway and froze. Tessa was there. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside a small group of children, handing out stickers shaped like suns and stars. A little boy tugged gently on her sleeve, and she leaned in with a warm smile, placing a bright gold star on the back of his hand. The boy giggled, holding his arm out proudly to show another child. She laughed softly, a sound he hadn't heard since their day at the fair. John didn't move. He simply watched. There she was, not the woman burdened by headlines, not the woman drowning under scrutiny, not the woman who whispered her fear into his ear with trembling doubt. She was herself, genuine, warm, present. Every part of her that he admired, her kindness, her sincerity, her ability to soften a room without trying, was on full display. His chest tightened, but this time it wasn't pain. It was clarity. She hadn't pulled away because she didn't care for him. She hadn't gone quiet because she wanted distance from him as a man. She pulled away because she felt her identity shrinking under the weight of his world. Yet here, surrounded by children who knew nothing of headlines, she came alive again. She hadn't disappeared. She'd simply returned to the place where she felt real. After a few minutes, she noticed someone standing by the door. When her eyes lifted and met his, she froze, not in fear or anger, but in surprise. "John," she breathed, rising slowly to her feet. He stepped forward with careful restraint, not wanting to overwhelm her. "I didn't know you'd be here." She glanced down briefly. "I come sometimes when I need to breathe." She looked back up. "What are you doing here?" "I needed the same thing," he said softly. Silence settled between them, gentle but uncertain. A child ran by clutching a sticker sheet, and Tessa reached over instinctively to steady him before letting him go. John watched the tenderness in her gesture and felt something shift deep inside him, an anchoring he didn't know he needed. "Tessa," he began, his voice low and steady, "I want to understand what you're going through. I don't want to assume anything." She took a quiet breath. "It wasn't about you not being good to me," she said. "It wasn't about us not fitting. I just felt everything spinning too fast. People looking at me, judging me. I felt like I was being swallowed up by something I never asked for." John nodded, staying still, giving her the space to express what she'd hidden in silence. She looked around the room, watching the children play. The volunteers' laugh, the soft rhythm of a clinic that didn't care about headlines. But here, nobody sees anything but me, just me, not a rumor, not a headline, not someone attached to a name the world recognizes. John's throat tightened. She continued, her voice steady but fragile. I left because I couldn't breathe, and because I didn't want you to see me drowning. His brows pulled together, not in irritation, but in realization, deep and sharp. Tessa, he said quietly, stepping closer. You didn't leave because you didn't care. She shook her head. No, I left because I cared more than I knew how to handle. Her honesty struck him again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't heavy and fear-filled like the whisper she had given him. It was open, vulnerable, clear. John swallowed, letting her words settle. I thought your whisper meant I was too much for you, he admitted. I thought loving me scared you because of what I might cost you. She looked down, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of her shirt. I wasn't scared of loving you, John. I was scared of losing me. That distinction changed everything. John stepped closer, not reaching for her yet, but letting her see the shift in his expression, a mix of tenderness, understanding, and a renewed strength he hadn't felt in days. Then let me help you hold on to yourself, he said, not pull you away from it. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his. He continued, I don't want you disappearing into my world. I want to build something with you where you don't shrink, where you grow. Tessa's breath caught, soft, barely audible. A group of volunteers walked by with boxes of donated supplies, and the soft commotion around them made the moment feel even more grounded, more real. This wasn't a dramatic confession or a grand gesture. It was truth meeting truth. John took one more small step forward. Seeing you here, with them, reminds me why I wanted to know you in the first place. Not the headlines, not the noise. You, she swallowed, her eyes glistening, not with tears of hurt this time, but with something gentler. John, she whispered. I'm not giving up on us, he said, not after seeing this, not after understanding what you were trying to protect. Her lips parted softly, caught between relief and uncertainty. He didn't ask for a promise. He didn't push for an answer. He simply let the quiet settle around them, quiet that felt like healing instead of pressure. For the first time since the whisper that broke him, John felt something else take root inside him, determination, not to hold her tightly, but to hold her rightly. The fear she carried no longer pushed him away. It guided him, he understood now, and understanding changed everything. The next afternoon, the Texas sun cast long strokes of light across the clinic courtyard. The building's pale brick exterior reflected the warmth of the day, but inside John's chest, a different heat stirred, steady, purposeful. He stood waiting near a small circular fountain tucked at the center of the courtyard, a quiet place where staff occasionally stepped out for fresh air. He had asked Tessa to meet him here, not with pressure, not with urgency, just a simple message. Can we talk? Outside, in the courtyard. When you're ready. He wasn't sure if she would come, but he hoped, deeply, that she would. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. The courtyard door opened behind him, and he turned. Tessa stepped out slowly, holding the doorknob for a moment, as if steadying herself before letting it close behind her. She approached with careful steps, her expression calm but guarded. She didn't look afraid, not like she had before, but she carried the weight of someone who'd spent days sorting through pieces of herself she didn't want to lose. Hi, she said softly. John nodded. Hi. He gestured to the bench near the fountain, and they sat, close enough to speak quietly, but with just enough space to breathe. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet between them wasn't tense, it was thoughtful, a silence filled with everything they hadn't said yet. John finally exhaled. Thank you for meeting me. I owed you a conversation, she said gently. And I want to talk. I just needed time. I know. His voice softened. And I didn't want to push you. Her eyes flickered down to her hands resting in her lap. I appreciate that. John took a steady breath. This was it, the moment he needed to be clear, honest, and unafraid. Tessa, he began. I've spent the last few days trying to understand something I should have figured out earlier. She looked up, meeting his gaze. He continued, You weren't overwhelmed because of me. You weren't running away from us. You were drowning in what the world around me brings. She nodded slowly, her eyes softening. Yes. I didn't know how to say it without hurting you. You didn't hurt me, he said. Your whisper shook me, Because I realized how much was at stake, not just for me, but for you." She inhaled gently, as if bracing herself. "I was scared that I'd wake up one day and not recognize myself, that everything I've worked for, my goals, my sense of purpose, would disappear under your name. I didn't want to lose the person I've been fighting to become." John listened closely, absorbing every word. She wasn't repeating fear out of panic anymore. This was clarity, self-awareness, truth shaped after reflection. "I understand that now," he said, "and I want you to know something." Tessa waited, eyes steady on his. "You mean more to me than the life I've built," he said quietly. "Not because you fill a void, not because you take away pressure, but because you remind me I'm a person, not a title, not a walking headline. You talk to me like a human being, and that's something I didn't realize I was starving for until you showed up." Her breath caught slightly, her eyes softening. He continued, voice steady. "I don't want a world where you disappear. I don't want a relationship that costs you your identity. I want a life where you grow, where your dreams stay yours, where your ambitions stay real, where you still look in the mirror and see the woman who walked into that hospital every day with her head held high." She swallowed, emotion tightening her expression. Not pain, but something warmer, something that signaled the start of the breakthrough they'd been edging toward. "John," she whispered. He held her gaze firmly, not intense, not forceful, just honest. "I don't want to break you. I don't want to overshadow you. I want to stand next to you, not above you. I want us to build something where you don't shrink, where you shine in the way you were meant to." Tessa blinked, and a faint tremor passed through her breath. "I never doubted how you felt about me," she said. "I doubted if I could survive the noise that comes with your life. I didn't want to become someone who hides behind your name because she lost faith in her own." "You won't," he replied. "Not as long as I have a say in it, and am willing to work, not just for us, but for you, so you don't lose yourself in my world or anyone else's." Her eyes lowered slightly. "I didn't expect you to understand this deeply. I didn't expect to feel this deeply," he admitted. "But I do. And I'm done letting fear speak louder than what I know is real between us." The wind brushed lightly across the courtyard. Tessa's shoulders relaxed, tension slowly melting in a way that had not happened since before the headlines, before the chaos, before the whisper that nearly tore them apart. "I never stopped caring," she said softly, "even when I pulled away. I thought distance would protect the parts of me that felt fragile." "And did it?" he asked gently. She paused, then shook her head. "No, it just hurt in a different way." John reached out, giving her space to decide. After a moment, she placed her hand in his, small, warm, steady. The breakthrough began right there, not with a dramatic confession, not with tears, not with impulsive promises, but with honesty meeting honesty, with two people choosing to face their truth instead of their fear. John squeezed her hand gently. "Let's figure this out together, one step at a time." She nodded. "I want to." The courtyard felt different now, less like a place of tension and more like a place of possibility, as if the air itself relaxed when they finally spoke, the words neither had been able to say before. For the first time in days, Tessa's shoulders eased. For the first time in days, John felt hope settle in his chest, solid and real. The breakthrough had begun. After their conversation in the courtyard, neither of them rushed to stand or move away. The ease between them, soft, steady, and newly rebuilt, gave the moment a warmth they hadn't shared since before everything fell apart. John still held her hand gently, tracing the edge of her knuckle with the side of his thumb, a quiet gesture that carried the promise of something more solid than words could deliver. "Tessa," he said after a moment, his tone shifting, not heavier but more intentional, as though something, long considered, was finally ready to surface. "There's something I've been carrying with me, something I've been waiting for the right moment to give you." She blinked softly. "What is it?" He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. The color was deep, almost midnight. He didn't open it immediately. He let the significance settle between them. Her breath hitched, not out of fear, but because she recognized the seriousness in his eyes. "This isn't what you think it is," he said quickly, sensing her rising tension. "It's not a ring asking you for anything you're not ready for. This is something different, something that belongs to us in a way that isn't about pressure or obligation." She relaxed slightly, curiosity tugging at the edge of her uncertainty. He opened the box slowly. Inside were two simple silver bands, minimal, smooth, no gemstones, no embellishments. They weren't extravagant. They weren't flashy. They weren't the kind of rings that screamed wealth or status. They were intentional, grounded, private. Her lips parted, a quiet breath slipping free. John looked at her with a tenderness that seemed to reach all the way back to the first night she sat beside him in the hospital. "I had these made a while ago," he said softly, "before everything got complicated." She stared at the rings, unable to speak yet. He continued, "I call them orbit rings, not because they're symbolic or poetic, but because they remind me that real connection doesn't swallow a person. It moves with them. It respects space. It grows, not by forcing closeness, but by choosing to stay aligned even when things become difficult." Tessa's heartbeat softened its frantic rhythm. His words weren't sweeping declarations. They were steady truths, offered without pressure. John gently lifted one of the bands from the box. "This isn't a promise that we'll never face noise or pressure again. I can't give you that. But I can give you this, my commitment to make sure you never lose who you are standing next to me." Her eyes shimmered, not with tears of fear, but with a gentler emotion she hadn't let herself feel since before the world intruded. "I don't want you to disappear," he continued. "I want you to stay you, and I want to be the man who protects that, not threatens it." She exhaled shakily. "John, you don't have to decide your whole life today," he said. "You don't even have to decide tomorrow. All I'm asking is, let this ring be a reminder that we move together. You in your orbit, me in mine. Side by side, not one overshadowing the other." Tessa glanced down at the ring again. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a symbol of ownership or claim. It was simple, peaceful, balanced, just like the connection they were finally learning to build. She looked back at him. "Why did you make two?" she asked quietly. John smiled softly. "Because I'm choosing mine too." He picked up the second ring and slipped it onto his own finger without hesitation. The gesture wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, grounded in quiet certainty. Her breath caught. "This means," he said, twisting the ring gently, "I'm not asking anything of you that I'm not giving myself. If you take yours, it's not because of me. It's because you want to choose us in a way that feels right for you." She stared at him, absorbing the sincerity in his tone, the steadiness in his eyes. So many people in his world expected things from him, demanded, assumed, claimed, but with her he wasn't demanding. He was offering. Slowly, her fingers lifted toward the box. Her hand hovered for a moment, hesitant, thoughtful, grounded in everything she had struggled with these past days. Then she picked up the silver band. John didn't move. He didn't lean forward. He didn't reach for her. He let her decide. Tessa held the ring between her fingers, feeling the cool metal warm slightly in her palm. "I thought choosing you meant choosing a world that might swallow me," she whispered. "But this feels like choosing a life where I don't have to fear that." His voice dropped into a gentle hush. "That's exactly what I want." She slid the ring onto her finger slowly, the metal settling against her skin with a weight that felt right, light, steady, meaningful. When she looked up, John's expression shifted, relief, gratitude, and something deeper flickering beneath. "You're choosing us," he said softly. "I am," she replied. "But I'm also choosing me, and I think for the first time, I'm realizing those things don't have to be different." John reached for her hand again, and when she let him intertwine their fingers, the connection felt different from any moment before. Not fragile, not conflicted, centered, balanced, aligned. "What now?" she whispered. "Now," he said, brushing his thumb lightly across her ring, "we start building a life where neither of us loses ourselves." Her lips curved into a soft smile, small but filled with certainty. For the first time since everything began, the fear that once clenched her heart loosened, and in its place something steady began to bloom. They had not made a promise to the world. They had made a promise to each other, and to themselves. For a long moment after Tessa slipped the silver band onto her finger, the courtyard fell into a soft stillness. Not empty, just calm, like the world finally paused long enough for them to catch up to the truth neither had been able to reach until now. John still held her hand gently, his thumb tracing across the ring as if confirming that this moment wasn't imagined. Tessa didn't pull away. She leaned back slightly, letting her shoulders rest, letting the weight she'd carried finally ease. The ring didn't claim her. It grounded her, and John could see the difference in her eyes. She inhaled slowly. It feels strange, she admitted. Not the ring, but how steady I feel right now. He nodded. Maybe we finally stopped letting everyone else decide the pace. She glanced down at their intertwined fingers. I think so. A breeze moved through the courtyard, lifting a few papers from a volunteer's desk nearby and carrying faint laughter from inside the clinic. It reminded her of the children she'd helped earlier, the simplicity of their smiles, the ease with which they saw goodness in people. She looked at John again. You know, they don't care who you are, she said softly. The kids, they don't know your name. They don't know your company. They just care that you showed up. John exhaled, his features softening. I think that's why I come here. Tessa studied him for a moment. The light caught the edge of the ring he wore, and a quiet realization settled into her chest. She wasn't alone in feeling swallowed by expectations. John had been carrying invisible weight too, different from hers, but heavy all the same. She shifted closer, her voice gentle. We can't control what people say. We can't control headlines or whispers or noise, but maybe we can control the way we respond to it. John turned to her fully, expression steady. I'm ready to do that with you. Whatever comes, but only if you're choosing it freely. She reached up and touched his cheek lightly, not a dramatic gesture, just a quiet acknowledgement of everything he had been carrying too. I'm choosing peace, she said. Not the world's version, ours. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with something he hadn't felt in a long time, relief so profound it almost felt like gratitude. And choosing peace, she continued, means choosing us without letting the world dictate what we are. He nodded slowly. I can live with that. I can fight for that. I don't want you fighting alone, she added quickly. I don't want you shielding me from everything. That's where I got scared. I thought you would carry the noise while I hid in the background. I don't want that. He understood immediately. You want partnership, not protection. Yes, she whispered. Partnership. John's hand tightened gently around hers. Then that's what we'll build, one day at a time. A small group of staff passed through the courtyard gate, greeting them with polite nods but without lingering. There were no stares, no whispers, no judgment in their expressions. Just ordinary acknowledgement. And in that simple moment, Tessa realized something important. Not everyone was watching her. Not everyone was judging her. Some people still saw her as herself, just as she saw John as himself. Maybe the world wasn't as loud as she feared. Maybe the noise had just felt louder because she didn't have her footing. But now, with her ring warm against her skin, with John beside her, not towering over her, not overshadowing her, she finally felt grounded enough to face whatever came next. Do you want to walk for a bit? John asked, his voice light. She nodded. Yes. They rose from the bench and moved through the courtyard pathway. The trees shaded them from the afternoon sun, and the faint sound of children playing drifted from the clinic windows. John walked slightly slower to match her pace, and she didn't rush. This wasn't a moment to hurry. As they reached the outer gate, Tessa glanced at him thoughtfully. You know, the world might never stop talking, she said, even if we live quietly. John lifted his hand, showing her the simple ring. Then we live louder in the ways that matter. She laughed softly. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is, he replied. Maybe it gets simple when we stop running from what scares us. She looked forward again, a small, warm smile forming. Then let's stop running. We already have, he said softly. Their steps fell into rhythm, natural, unforced. The kind of rhythm that didn't require effort because it wasn't a performance. It was a choice they were finally making together. As they reached the edge of the courtyard, Tessa stopped and turned toward him. John, thank you. For what? For seeing me. For listening. For not giving up when I didn't have the words. He stepped closer, resting his forehead gently against hers. I didn't fight for the world's approval, he whispered. I fought for the woman who made me feel human again. Her breath caught, not from surprise but from the truth she felt mirrored in her own heart. And I'm choosing that man, she whispered back. Not the world's version of you, just you. They stayed like that for a quiet moment. No urgency, no audience, no fear creeping between them. Just peace, the kind they had both been searching for. And together, they chose it. If this moment touched your heart, please take a second to like this video and leave a comment sharing what stood out to you. Your support helps our stories reach more people. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Mr. Brugman's Stories for more powerful, life-changing narratives. God bless you. Spring settled over Texas with a softness that felt designed for days like this. Warm enough to wrap the world in gold, cool enough to keep the moments comfortable, still enough to let every breath linger in the air without rushing away. The chapel Tessa had chosen sat just beyond a stretch of open pasture land, white wooden beams standing firm against the rolling fields behind it. It wasn't a grand venue. It wasn't lavish or crowded, and that was exactly why it felt right. John stood beneath the wide sky as guests, just a few close family members from both sides, took their seats on simple wooden benches arranged on the grass. Wildflowers bloomed across the field, splashing soft yellows, pinks, and whites across the landscape. A breeze drifted through, carrying their faint scent. He adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket, not out of nerves, but out of a stillness that settled inside him with surprising strength. Today wasn't about spectacle. Today wasn't about proving anything to the world. It was about choosing her openly in the same way he had chosen her quietly. He glanced down at the silver band he already wore, the ring that marked the moment they learned how to move together without losing who they were. He touched it once, then let his hand fall naturally back to his side. The chapel doors opened. Everyone rose, but John stood frozen for half a heartbeat. Tessa stepped out into the light. She wore a dress as simple as the day was beautiful, soft flowing fabric that caught the spring breeze just enough to give her a quiet radiance. She didn't wear heavy makeup, just a natural glow that came from happiness itself. Her mother's pearl necklace rested gently at her collarbone, catching the afternoon sun. But it was her expression that struck him deepest, calm, warm, certain. She didn't look overwhelmed or fragile. She looked present, grounded, and entirely herself. She walked down the short aisle, her steps slow and steady. When she reached him, she let out a small breath that sounded like a secret promise to the day. "You look incredible," John whispered. Her smile widened. "So do you." The officiant, a longtime local pastor who had known Tessa's family for years, stepped forward. "We gathered today," he said gently, "not to witness a spectacle, but to witness a choice made not in front of cameras or crowds, but under the same open sky that watched over their first beginning." John felt Tessa's fingers slip into his, their hands locking naturally. "And so," the pastor continued, "we bless this day with gratitude for love that grows, for identity that stays strong, and for partnership that honors both." The ceremony followed no elaborate script. It was short, heartfelt, and personal, exactly what they wanted. When it was time for vows, John breathed in slowly and stepped closer to her. "Tessa," he began, voice steady, warm, "I don't stand here because I want to change your life. I stand here because you changed mine by reminding me that I don't have to be anything more than myself. You've seen me on my worst days, my vulnerable days, and the days when the world felt too loud. And somehow, you stayed long enough to teach me how to quiet the noise." Her eyes softened, glistening just enough to reflect the sun. "You made me believe," he continued, "that love doesn't take anything away. It adds to who we already are. And I promise, every day, to add to your life, not overshadow it, to hold space for your dreams, to stand beside you without asking you to shrink for me, to choose you not just today, but every day after." Tessa exhaled shakily as he finished, her hand tightening in his. Then she stepped forward for her vows. "John," she said, voice trembling with emotion but strong beneath it, "I thought loving someone like you would mean losing the person I fought so hard to become. But instead, you helped me find parts of myself I didn't know were missing. You saw me even when I was scared to be seen. You listened when I didn't know how to speak. You stayed when I pulled away." John's chest tightened, her words gentle but powerful. "I promise," she continued, "to walk with you, not behind you, not in front of you, with you. I promise to keep my identity, my dreams, and my voice, and to share them with you instead of hiding from the world. I promise to let love grow without fear, and to choose peace with you, even when the world feels loud." A quiet wind passed through the field as if to honor her words. The pastor smiled softly. "These vows," he said, "are not about becoming one person. They are about walking together as two whole people. This is the strength of partnership." John lifted Tessa's hand and slid a new ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that matched his. She repeated the gesture with the same calm certainty they had shared since the moment they chose each other beneath the courtyard's soft light. When the pastor blessed their union, the applause from their small circle of loved ones rose gently, as warm as the day itself. "You may kiss the bride," he announced with a smile. John leaned in, brushing his forehead lightly against hers before their lips met. a kiss filled with gratitude, softness, and the promise of the life they were stepping into together. When they pulled apart, Tessa laughed quietly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "We really did it," she whispered. John wrapped an arm around her waist as they turned to face the field, sunlight settling over their shoulders. "We did," he murmured. "Exactly the way we were meant to." The spring air wrapped around them, warm and comforting, as their guests approached with smiles and quiet congratulations. Under the open Texas sky, wide, endless, and full of possibility, they began the first chapter of the life they would build together. Their wedding day settled into memory with a sweetness neither of them rushed to let go of. But life didn't pause for newlyweds. It moved gently forward, carrying them into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar, a blend of Tessa's quiet strength and John's steady warmth. Their first year together unfolded in a home just outside Dallas, a house framed by tall oak trees and wide porches that caught the evening light perfectly. It wasn't extravagant, it wasn't meant to be. It was chosen for comfort, privacy, and the peace they had fought so hard to earn. Tessa filled the place with small touches of herself, soft blankets draped across the couch, photos from quiet moments, her nursing textbooks stacked neatly beside a lamp she always forgot to turn off. John brought his own touches too. Fresh coffee every morning, handwritten notes tucked into her lunch bag, a habit of leaving the porch light on whenever she worked late. Their days found a quiet pattern. Tessa studying in the early evenings, curled up with medical notes spread across their dining table. John cooking simple dinners, often insisting she take a break so he could bring her a plate. Himself, long walks around the neighborhood just before sunset, fingers brushing lightly, steps naturally matching. They didn't chase perfection. They just lived. And each day, their life together rooted itself deeper. One morning, everything changed. Tessa stood in the small bathroom down the hall, a hand pressed lightly over her mouth as she stared at the test in her other hand. Her breath trembled, not from fear but from something tender and overwhelming. John knocked gently. "You okay in there?" She opened the door slowly, revealing the truth without needing to speak. The test sat in her palm, the result clear. For a moment, John didn't move. Then the realization hit him, and he reached out, pulling her into a warm, steady embrace. He held her with the same calm strength he had shown from the beginning, but now layered with a joy so deep it softened his entire expression. "Tessa," he whispered, "we're going to be parents." She pressed her forehead against his chest, overwhelmed but smiling. "I know. I can't believe it." He lifted her chin gently. "We can do this, together." And they did. The months that followed were full of quiet preparation. John accompanied her to every appointment, listening carefully to the doctor's explanations, asking thoughtful questions, and holding her hand whenever she felt nervous. He read parenting books late into the night, sometimes falling asleep with a highlighter still in his hand. Tessa, glowing with each passing week, balanced her studies and work with more caution now. John often reminded her to rest, placing pillows behind her back, fetching water, adjusting blankets when she drifted off during her readings. They built a nursery together in the sunlit room at the end of the hallway. Soft blue walls, a wooden crib John put together himself, little shelves filled with stuffed animals they picked out one weekend at a local shop. Tessa folded tiny clothes with gentle hands, occasionally pausing to imagine holding their baby. The anticipation didn't feel rushed. It felt earned. When the day finally arrived, it came with the quiet urgency of early morning. Tessa felt the first contraction just before dawn, gripping the edge of the bed, as John jolted awake beside her. He didn't panic. He didn't lose focus. He simply moved with intention, grabbing the hospital bag, helping her into the car, steadying her breathing as they drove through the calm Dallas streets. Hours later, in a warm hospital room bathed in soft afternoon light, their son entered the world. The nurse placed him gently into Tessa's arms, his small breaths rising against her chest. She stared at him, expression melting into something pure and complete. John stood beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder, his other brushing lightly over the baby's tiny fingers. They named him David, a name they both felt carried strength without weight, gentleness without fragility. Tessa whispered, "Hi, baby," and the room seemed to quiet around her voice. John leaned close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You did so well," he murmured. "You're amazing." She turned her head slightly to look at him. "We did this together." He smiled softly, eyes fixed on their son. "He's perfect." When they brought David home, the world felt different, not louder, not heavier, just fuller. The house took on a new rhythm, soft cries at 3 a.m., warm bottles warming on the counter. Tessa rocking David in the nursery chair, humming gently, John walking him around the living room to help him fall asleep. Their days became a blend of shared responsibilities and small joys. Tiny socks drying on a rack, baby laughter filling the hallway, naps taken on the couch with David curled on John's chest. It was not glamorous. It was not dramatic. But it was real. And it was theirs. One evening, after David had finally drifted asleep, Tessa and John sat together on the porch, wrapped in a light blanket. The air carried the calm scent of spring grass, and the sky stretched endlessly above them. Tessa leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I didn't think life could feel this peaceful," she said quietly. John threaded his fingers through hers. "It feels right," he replied, "like everything we went through was leading us here." She looked toward the window where David slept. "I'm grateful," she whispered. "For him, for you, for everything." John kissed the side of her head gently. "I am too. Their home wasn't perfect. Their life wasn't flawless, but their peace was real, built from choices made with intention, love, and respect." And as they sat together under the softening evening light, they understood that this was the life they had fought for. A family, a home, a future they built side by side. The Texas night stretched wide above their home, the kind of night that made everything feel slower, calmer, almost sacred. Stars shimmered overhead like scattered embers, quiet and steady, watching over the world beneath them. The porch lights cast a warm glow over the wooden boards where John and Tessa sat side by side, wrapped in a shared moment of peace. Inside the house, David slept soundly. The soft hum of the baby monitor filled the background, a gentle reminder of the new life they had brought into the world. Every time they heard his tiny breaths through the speaker, something inside them softened. Tessa curled her legs underneath her and leaned into John's side, resting her head against his shoulder. He shifted just enough to fit her more comfortably, his arms sliding around her. They said nothing for a long time. Silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. "Do you ever think about how far we came?" she finally whispered. John exhaled slowly, letting the warm night air fill his lungs. "Every single day." Tessa smiled softly. "I still remember the first night I saw you lying in that hospital bed. You looked so lost. I didn't know anything about your world. I didn't know your name, your company, your background. I just knew you needed someone to care." He turned his head slightly, brushing his lips against her temple. "You cared before you knew anything else about me. That's something I'll never forget." She lifted her gaze to the sky. "It's strange. People always talk about finding someone who can give them everything. But you taught me that the real gift isn't money or success. It's feeling safe with someone, feeling understood." John tightened his hold on her. "And you taught me something I didn't know I needed," he said quietly. "You taught me that love doesn't change your identity, it strengthens it. You didn't become smaller to fit my world. You showed me how to build a new one, where we both fit." Her chest warmed at his words. "I used to be scared I'd lose myself," she admitted. "But now, I feel more like myself than ever." John watched the moon rise just above the oak trees. "That's how I know we did this right," he murmured. "Not by shutting out the world, not by pretending the pressure didn't exist, but by choosing what mattered more than the noise." They fell quiet again, letting the night breathe around them. Crickets chirped softly in the grass. A distant train horn echoed faintly across the fields, the sound rolling gently through the quiet air. Tessa reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "You know what I realized?" she said. "When everything fell apart, the photos, the questions, the pressure, I wasn't scared because of what you did. I was scared because I didn't know who I was in your world yet." John's expression softened. "And now?" She looked at him with a certainty that had taken time, patience, and honesty to build. "Now I know exactly who I am. I'm still Tessa. I'm still the girl who studied during late shifts and drank cold hospital coffee. I'm still the woman who dreamed of becoming a doctor. The only difference is, now I have someone who believes in those dreams with me." John cupped her cheek gently, turning her face toward his. "I don't just believe in your dreams," he whispered. "I believe in you." Her eyes glistened, not with fear, but with gratitude. "And I believe in us." The porch light flickered slightly as a breeze passed through, lifting the edges of her hair and carrying the scent of spring across the yard. Somewhere inside, David let out a soft murmur before settling again. Tessa smiled. "He's going to grow up with so much love." John nodded. "Because he'll see it every day." Their gaze shifted back to the sky, where the stars shone sharp and clear. It was impossible not to think back to the days when fear ruled their choices, when the world outside felt too loud to face. But sitting here now, side by side, they understood something they hadn't recognized back then. Happiness wasn't found in wealth. It wasn't found in status. It wasn't found in other people's approval. Happiness came from partnership, true partnership, where identity wasn't lost, but strengthened, where dreams didn't fade, but grew, where love wasn't a performance, but a practice built one honest moment at a time. Tessa whispered, "We built a life that makes sense." "And we built it together," John added. She rested her head back on his shoulder, letting her eyes drift across the open landscape. "If someone asked me what the greatest surprise of my life was," she said softly, I'd say it was discovering that love can be simple, even when the world is complicated." John reached over and brushed his thumb across the ring she wore, the same ring that symbolized balance, intention, and the promise to move in the same direction without losing themselves. "And I'd say the greatest surprise of mine," he replied, "was realizing that I didn't need to be larger than life to be worthy of you. I just needed to be real." She lifted her hand and touched his ring in return. "We chose each other, not for what we had, but for who we were." Under the vast Texas sky, those words settled between them with a quiet finality, steady, warm, and true. Their journey hadn't been easy. It hadn't been perfect, but it had brought them exactly where they were meant to be, with peace in their hearts, with clarity in their identities, with love strong enough to stand against anything. A family, a partnership, a future built with intention. Tessa looked at him one more time and whispered, "This is everything I ever hoped for." John kissed her forehead softly. "And it's only the beginning." If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to Mr. Brugman Stories. Your support helps us share more inspiring, life-changing stories with the world. God bless you for listening.